Hi guys, thank you so much for tuning in and welcome back to Sewing Lara. In today's tutorial, I will show you how to make 3 hemming stitches. So we will start with the blanket stitch, which looks like so. And then I will show you how to make the whip stitch, which is quite similar, but a little bit easier. And last but not least, I will teach you how to make the so-called ladder stitch, which is a very important stitch. That's a stitch you will need not only for hand stitching, but also once you move on to your sewing machine. The supplies that you will need today are a few pieces of fabric. You don't necessarily need to cut out shapes like this. Rectangles will do, but I thought it would be fun. And then you'll need a thread and a needle, a few pins, and scissors. So if you have your sewing supplies ready, we can start. Let's start with the blanket stitch. So I already double threaded my needle, made sure that the needle was centered, and I made a knot on the other end. I cut out these 2 circles of an old blanket, and now I will secure both layers of the fabric so that they would stay nicely together. I will secure them with 2 pins. So now we have to determine how big the blanket stitch is supposed to be. So my idea was about that far from the edge. So I will lift the top layer and I will pinch the needle through exactly as far as we just decided from the edge. I will pull the thread through, and now the knot is nicely hidden between the 2 layers of the fabric. So I will put the thread up like so. And now I will pinch the needle through the back side so that I would come through both layers, and I will come through exactly where the stitch started. Now I will hold the thread on the top like so that it doesn't get tangled. And this way I will create kind of a loop around the edge, and I will pull the needle through like so. So now I'm making the stitch from left to right. So I put the needle through to the left. And now the needle is secured, or actually not the needle, the thread is secured here on the top. And that's exactly what I want. I want the thread kind of frame the entire edge of these 2 circles. So we will make the second stitch. So the distance from the edge should be the same, or at least as equal as possible. I will pull the needle through both layers of the fabric, and I will wrap the thread around like so into the direction into which I'm moving. So I'm moving from left to right, so I wrapped it from left to right around the needle. And now I will carefully tighten the loop, not too much because you don't want the thread to pinch the fabric together, but it should be tight enough so that it doesn't create any kind of weird things here. So it should be kind of laying on the edge. That's the tightness that you want. So let's make another stitch. Again, pinch both layers of the fabric, create a loop. You have to be careful with the pins in. And of course, as always, when the camera's running, the thread likes to tangle extra much, but that's okay because at least you see how I detangle it. So I always kind of pull on it carefully, and then it gets loose again. And this thread does it a lot, also in my sewing machine, by the way. So we just created the next stitch. Let's make another one together. Pinch the needle through both layers, loop, maybe hold the thread like so. And what helps me is to kind of readjust the thread as I'm tightening it, because it likes to kind of, twist. And when I readjust it before I pull it through, it sometimes really helps. So let's make another stitch together. Pinch the needle through, make a loop around the thread that you just pulled through both layers of fabric. Make sure nothing gets tangled. and slightly tighten it, not too much. And this is what the stitch looks like. So I'm going to stitch as far as I can with this amount of thread. And once I will reach the point where my thread will be around the place where it's gonna run out, I will show you how I finish and how I start with newly threaded needle. Now I came to the point where my thread is about to run out. So what I like doing is securing the thread once more around the loop, opening the two layers a little bit, and I like pinching the needle through only the very top layer of one side of the fabric twice so that it's secure, and I like leaving the tail a little bit longer. You'll see in a second why. In the meantime, I will double thread my needle again, and now instead of making a knot at the end, I will tie the tail of the thread that's running out with the end of my newly threaded needle and make a knot here, like so, basically tied together. Make sure it's nicely tied. I will cut back both tails just enough so that they don't stick out. And of course something's sticking out, so let's cut it. And now I will make sure that the needle is centered. And still from the inside, I will move exactly to the place where the upper part of the stitch ended, and kind of put the needle through from right to the left behind the end of the loop. And this way I'm on the top. I have only one knot inside, so it's pretty flat. And that's my personal favorite way how to end one's part of the stitch and how to start another one. It works really great for me, and I just like doing it this way, so that's why I wanted to show you this. And now we will simply finish. And here we came to a point where I'm here at the end of this loop, and there is an empty space between the very first stitch and between the last stitch. So what I will do is I will put the needle through from right to the left through this first loop, and I will do it twice and make a knot. Basically twist the thread once around the needle. You have to be very careful now here while you're pulling on this, because again, the thread sure likes to get tangled. And usually when you're just about to finish, then things happen so that you can start again. Happens to me sometimes, and it can be very frustrating. So if anything like that happens to you during stitching, please don't be sad. It happens literally to us all, no matter how long you're sewing. So now this is secure, and I want to hide this thread. So I'm going to move the thread between the two layers of fabric, and without it being visible, I'm kind of gonna get it caught through the fabric somewhere but without penetrating it. I don't know if it makes any sense. I'm gonna show you on a spare piece. So basically you're gonna do something like this. See? So I'm not pinching the needle all the way through, but like getting it caught. And that's what I want. So what you can do is you can slightly separate these two sides very carefully. And as it opens, you have here a little bit of space. So, you know, pinch through the top layer of one side of the circles. Again, make sure that it doesn't get tangled because it's a little bit twisted already at this point. So I have to untwist it. And now stitch through the same spot twice. And then pull the needle through the loop. And that way you created a very small knot. And you can chop the thread quite close to the knot. And now I like grabbing the needle and kind of pushing the little knot inside and covering it so that you can't even tell where the knot is. So basically play a little bit with this thread on the edge, making sure the inside is not visible. And that way we finished our blanket stitch around this circle. But we will do the blanket stitch now the other way around, from right to the left. So just like with the circles, I will pinch the needle through right here where I want my stitch to start. I will hide the knot between the two layers of fabric, and then I will come through the needle, not through the needle, through both layers of the fabric with the needle. This will create a loop, and I will pull the thread from right to the left. And this way I created my first stitch. Now I will move the thread like so from right to the left. Pinch through both layers of fabric, pull through the loop, and slightly tighten. Let's do this again. Move the thread, you can move it like so around your finger, because that way you can already control it a little bit so it doesn't get tangled so much. Pinch both layers of the fabric through, and come through with the thread through the loop. And we'll continue doing so. And now I'm about to finish this thread, so I will again secure the needle around this loop. So this time I will move from the left to the right. This will create kind of a knot. I will open these two layers, and I'll do it differently this time. So I will simply pinch the needle through the very top layer of this side, and I will do the sew up here. Now I threaded my needle again. This time I made a knot at the end. I will again open these two layers of fabric. I will pinch again only the very top layer of one side, and I will also pinch through this little knot that I created as I secured the thread around the loop. You just have to play with it a little bit till you catch through. So let me pull it through like so, and now I can see my needle was not necessarily centered, which caused a little problem, but I will readjust it. And now I have two knots on the inside. I am again on the top, and I'm ready to create the next stitch. So again, to the left, through both layers of the fabric, through the loop, tighten slightly, and we can make the next stitch. And we will finish like so the entire row. this is how I like moving around the corner. So I will again come through the loop again, put the needle through between the layers of the fabric and come through here where I started, or basically ended, I don't know, where the bottom is of this stitch. That's what I'm trying to say. And I would pinch now both layers through, come through the same spot, and I would move the needle through from left to right so that I would secure it on the top. And now I can move again from right to left, just like we did so far. So nothing changes, and as soon as I will run out of thread, you can decide either you want to tie both ends of this thread and the new thread, or you will simply make 2 knots. That is, of course, up to you what works the best for you. It also depends on how thick the fabric is. If you have a really thick fabric, then it doesn't matter if you have 2 knots inside. Should the fabric be a little bit thinner, then it's probably a good idea to simply just tie the ends to 1 knot so that there is as few knots inside as possible. And this is how you make the blanket stitch. Before we move on to the next stitch, I would like to point out a little mistake that I made here. So as I switched from moving from left to the right to stitching from right to the left, I was kind of confused here at the beginning, and you can see that the thread here was not secured behind this loop. And that's because I did not consider the direction through into which I was supposed to pull the thread through. So if you're moving from right to the left, you want to secure the first loop, or the thread pulled through the first loop, into the opposite direction, so from left to the right, and then it would have been nicely pulled behind this loop and it would stay on the top instead of moving here across. If you would do it into the opposite direction, so from left to the right, then you would have to pull the thread through the first loop from right to the left before you would start moving into your direction. And you have seen, as you move left to the right, you always make the loop around the thread with the second and further stitches exactly into the same direction into which you're moving. So here, this thread should have been pulled from left to the right, and then I did it correctly, always looped the thread from right to the left. But it's not so bad that this happened. At least you see how the mistake would look like. You can easily recognize it now, and you can understand what the mistake was. And now let's move on to the next hemming stitch. Now let's create the whip stitch together. So I have here again a small piece of the old blanket, and I will pinch the needle through here right at the beginning. And all I will do is I will create simply loops around the entire edge. It's very simple, kind of similar to the blanket stitch, but I won't be pulling the thread through the loops this time. So I will move to the right, and I will come from the back side, from the bottom of these 2 layers, and pull the thread through. And here we created our first loop. Again, make sure it doesn't pinch the fabric together too much. It shouldn't be too tight. And again, I will move from the back, create a loop, and that's all I will be doing around the entire edge. So it's very easy, it's very quick. It's perfect for edging of fabrics that do not fray, or for any projects where you don't really care that much about fraying or the outcome. It might be just a kind of supporting stitch for you, or whatever reason you have for this, but it's very simple, as you can see. And of course you can decide what the distance should be. It's up to you, depending also on your project, also what looks best for you. So again, I will pinch the needle through from the bottom, come through on the top, create a loop, slightly tighten it, and I'm ready to make the next stitch. Very, very easy. Now we came to the corner, so I will turn the fabric and I will again move from left to the right. And now I came to a point where my needle, not my needle, my thread is about to run out. So you can move to the bottom and come through only the layer that's on the bottom and do here the sew up, or you will tie here to the tail the newly threaded, like the thread that you newly thread into your needle. I don't know if that sentence was English, but I guess you understand what I mean. That is up to you. For now, I will simply do the sew up here. I will make sure that I pinch only the top layer of the fabric so that I can't see it from the other side. So I will make 2 loops around the thread, pull the needle through. I have my little knot, chop it. Now I will thread my needle again. And this time I will see where would the needle come through if I would have pinched it through both layers of the fabric, right? That would be about here. So I will move between the 2 layers, and that's where I'm going to come out here, while the knot of the thread will stay inside. So I'm just gonna hide it nicely. And now I can continue with my whip stitch. Move to the right, pull the thread through, create a loop, don't tighten too much, and I'm almost done with the second side. And now we came to the end. So here I could pinch through and come through exactly where I ended, or like where the bottom of the stitch is. I could make here, I could pull the needle through the loop, make a little knot so that the end of the thread would be secure, or just loop it like once around. So now we made a little knot. So this is kind of the sew up, and I will simply come with the needle through and catch it again onto the inside of the fabric, pull it through, and cut it. And this way it's hidden and I did my sew up. So that's how it looks like. Now let's make the whip stitch from right to the left. So I will come with the needle through here exactly where the bottom of this stitch is, here on the corner. I made a knot at the end of my thread and I will nicely hide it now between the 2 layers. So pull it a little bit more in. You can always play with the needle and kind of push these things in. This is something you can make habit of. It's very helpful. And so now we're moving from the right to the left. That means I will move from the back side 1 stitch further to the left. And this way I will create the first loop. Make sure nothing gets tangled. And the next one, again, from the back side, or from the bottom basically, because it's not really the wrong side in this case, because it's both the right side, so from the bottom. And again, 1 stitch to the left, from the bottom, pull the thread through the top, and we have our next loop. And we are almost done, so let's do the sew up together. So I will make 1 or 2 more stitches. I think 2 will be exactly the amount we need. So I will connect here the last stitch with the center of the edge. This is where I also have the bottom of one of the other stitches that came from the other side. And I think I will just pull the needle through like so this time. Let's do it a little bit differently, the sew up, so that you can see a little bit more variations. And just like we did with the blanket stitch, I will make the sew up here inside between these two layers. And that's again where you have to take the needle and kind of play a little bit with the fabric and pull it slightly apart, and then catch just the very top of one of the layers. Make the sew up. Don't be afraid of it, you'll be fine. It's all just practice. If it doesn't work immediately, don't be sad, because it takes a while and everyone has a different learning curve, and practice makes perfect. So, and now I made the sew up, chopped the thread, and we finished our whip stitch. The last stitch that we are going to make together today is the ladder stitch. That's a great stitch for mending things. You will use it whenever you want to sew or stitch 2 layers of fabric so that the stitch wouldn't be visible on the outside. So what I have here is a rectangle, and I folded the edges inwards, and I'm going to pin them together again so that they are nicely secure a little bit further from the edge. And now I want to make basically a running stitch between these 2 layers. So let's call this the bottom layer, and this is the top layer. But I'm going to be pinching through only the inside. What I folded, basically, the fold, the needle will never penetrate this or this side, so the right side. So it's going to be always only on the inside. So if you remember, running stitch is basically moving needle like so through the fabric. So I single threaded my needle for this part of the tutorial because I'm kind of lazy, and I made a knot at the end. So I will pinch the needle through here from the inside and come very close to the edge, but not exactly on the edge, because again, I want this stitch to be hidden. And I'm going to move the fabric like so that you can see it easier what I'm going to be doing. So exactly at the same level, the needle comes through on the opposite side. I will make 1 running stitch, pull the thread through, and the first stitch is already going to pull these sides closely together. I will stay at the same level, pinch the needle through the inside, and move 1 to the left, because I'm stitching from right to the left. And I have the next stitch. So you always stay at the same level first, pinch the needle through very closely to the edge, but not exactly there. Pinch only through the inside, move into the direction into which you are stitching, pull it out, and go to the other side at the same level again. Next running stitch. And you can see that now these 2 sides are nicely stitched together, but you can't see any stitch. So it's really pretty. And again, this is a great stitch if you need to mend clothes and you don't have a sewing machine. This is something you'll be using a lot. Also, even if you have a sewing machine, there are so many parts of sewing where you will have to stitch together a little opening, because let's say you were turning something up inside out, and once you finish your work, there's a little piece that needs to be stitched together. So that's a very, very important stitch. So you definitely want to practice this one. And again, I'm staying at the same level, pinching the needle through here on the opposite side, making 1 running stitch into the direction into which I'm moving to the other level, the next side, I'm sorry, same level, 1 running stitch, and this is the result. Of course, over time, when you're gonna be used to this stitch, you can move a little bit faster like so. Make maybe 2 stitches at once. Whatever feels comfortable to you. And again, If it doesn't work immediately, don't worry, it will. You just need to practice. These are things I know very few people who learned it immediately and were immediately perfect. Everything needs practice. And that is how you make these 3 hemming stitches. I hope that you enjoyed today's tutorial. Thank you all so much for watching and happy sewing!